Alright guys, what's up? This is going to be the first video on our channel. We're going to be explaining our influences and biases so that going forward on the podcast that we're going to be doing as the main project, you don't have to try and guess our positions and our mindsets coming to the books that we're going to be reading.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I really don't like it when certain people just never really reveal what they actually stand for. And they kind of just teeter around everything without giving any kind of direct answer. Not to name names, but Jordan B. Peterson does this a lot.
The books, we really want to bring something to the material that we're reading. It's not like the books themselves are important, yes, but it's also about what we can bring out of them, and the new perspectives that we can bring to 1,000-year-old literature.
That's true, and I think we definitely have somewhat different perspectives than most people on the internet.
Yes, I guess you could say that.
Just a little bit. So we're gonna get into this.
Doxxah, why don't you give an example of one of those unorthodox views?
So, I mean, Jack Donovan's pretty unorthodox. Literally says you should, basically make a gang. I mean, a tribe. A tribe.
Why don't you explain for us, Doxxah?
What?
Why don't you explain for us who exactly Jack Donovan is?
I think I'm going to leave that to you just because you know him best. So I'm just going to say he's an influencer, both of us. And then second I got on the list is Dostoevsky, one of probably the best Russian authors ever. And he just wrote gigantic tomes, like Brothers Karamazov, bro. You can't read that in a day. That'd be insane. It's such a good book. It's like 1,000 pages long. It's the book where their Inquisitor short story appears in it. That's literally a short story somebody made up within the universe of the book. It's just so meta. Like, the storytelling in it is insane, but also just the ideas in it are pretty formative. It's very, very pro-monarchy, very establishment, pro-orthodox church. And
how has it changed the way you think?
Definitely made me dislike communists a lot more. It does a really good job of kind of diagnosing the Marxist leftists, even at that time. And you can definitely see strands of that thought that have gone back and echo all the way up from Russia in the 1800s to now, I'd say, in the U.S. on college campuses and kind of everywhere, pretty much. And Dostoevsky did a really good job of just describing them and kind of the mindset and how it was really influencing his country. And there's actually a lot of people that really don't like him because of that. There's definitely some other reasons.
Dang, I didn't know that.
Yeah. No, I remember reading, I forget if it was a blog post or something, or it was a Reddit comment or something. It was just some, actual communist was really ticked off at the way that socialists were portrayed in Dostoevsky's works.
What about it was inaccurate, according to him?
He was just oh, they're not like that. But
I swear we're not murderers.
But the thing is that Dostoevsky was in a circle amongst these people at the time. So maybe modern Marxists are not the same, but definitely at the time, Dostoevsky had first-hand experience with these people in Russia.
The only thing that's really changed with Marxists now and then is that the balls have shrunk over time. In my opinion, at least.
They're not willing to do as many terrorist attacks or advocate for more violent revolutions. And I say definitely their economics is less. It's not as much about economics as it is about class and race and other aspects of Marxism, I'd say.
Okay.
And then
so what else? What other influences have you had?
Dan Carlin. Very good podcaster, actually. Probably one of the inspirations for me to make this podcast in the first place. He just does really, really good podcasts. If you need somebody to listen to, 24 hours about World War I, and it feels like it's not long enough. That's how good he is at podcasting, I'd say. And he just has a very, very different view on history. He argues for some stuff where if you heard anybody else arguing for it, you would be very confused. you would wonder how this person's hated or people aren't ranting against him, because he just has very different ways of looking at history. And it really just hammers down the view that like people's mindsets in the past were actually very, very different, to the point where they just didn't see things the same way as we do now. Like if I went into the past now as somebody that's already been growing up in the 21st century, there's no way I'd be able to comprehend most of the things that happen. And he really just hammers that home, especially in his podcast about public executions and the way people used to view them. Like, for instance, at a certain point in history, the grip of Christianity was so strong on, like, people's minds and stuff, and, like, everything was viewed through a religious context. So they saw, like horrendous, like, very, very brutal public executions as, like, a way for a sinner to repent. And so people in the crowd would, like, sing hymns, and the condemned, while they were being murdered, or not murdered, or publicly executed, would sing them back. Or they would repeat different phrases from, like, biblical phrases to each other. And then when kids would go home after that, their parents would be like, wasn't that such a spiritually uplifting experience, guys? Because they saw that as a way to, like, rid the person of sin, which is very different from the way people would react to public executions now. And it's kind of shifted to the state flexing its muscles and trying to be a Chad, rather than a religious context and the idea of justice, which I think is what it originally amounted to. And so that really just changed how I viewed stuff, because, like, the way we view public executions now is probably more bizarre than people ever did, when you think about it.
Yeah. Looking at us right now, I'd reckon that most human beings in the past, looking at modern human beings, would probably call us insane degenerates.
Definitely. And I feel like people nowadays, like, how many people have seen somebody violently die in front of them? That's a much smaller proportion of people than it used to be. Or people that don't die, like, that have seen the state do these kinds of things. Like, it used to be pretty common practice. And so Dan Carlin is definitely a big influence with that. Probably one of the biggest theological influences is Soren Kierkegaard. He was kind of at the same time as Nietzsche. They were reacting to the same world, kind of like when science and I can't remember his name. Evolution.
Dawkins?
Charles Darwin. I thought Dawkins too. Charles Darwin. And the theory of evolution kind of turned the whole social order, like, on its head. And Soren Kierkegaard was reacting to that, but he kind of did the opposite of Nietzsche, where Nietzsche reacted in a very, like, militant atheist way. Soren Kierkegaard reacted in a very, very religious way. And so I've definitely found that to be very interesting and inspiring. And a lot of the concepts he brings about, like, about anxiety and about all these different things. He was the one that kind of started the term leap of faith, too. That's a thing from Soren Kierkegaard. He made that a thing. And just his way of, like, rationalizing different religious beliefs is very interesting. Not really rationalizing, but the way he justified it was very different from, I'd say, 99% of other, like, religious philosophers at the time. And so after that, that's all of the kind of older stuff. The next person's pretty contemporary, Ted Kaczynski. So I don't condone, obviously, terrorist attacks.
We disavow.
But the manifesto, and I think there's even some other university stuff now where it's like the Unabomber had a point. I forget where it was. But the Unabomber manifesto is very just spot on at diagnosing the modern world and technology and people's kind of dissatisfaction with it. It kind of even goes into tribalism, too, where he talks about how people within small groups of people have more power and influence, and they want to feel that power and influence in their lives. And
surrogate activities and all that.
Yeah, surrogate activities. And so that's most of my influences. I'm trying to think of... Oh, there's a big one I missed. The Stoics, for sure. They are probably one of the biggest, like, just philosophical influences, because I've read a lot of them. I've read Seneca, I've read Epictetus, I've read some of Marcus Aurelius. And just their views on stuff, their concept of the logos is very interesting, where the world has kind of a divine order. And the Stoics definitely, the biggest thing I take away from them is the idea that, like, order is important and that you have control over your own actions, which sounds kind of basic, but it's actually a pretty big deal when you realize how much control you can possibly have over like a lifetime of training and of like stoic exercises and stuff. Like the stoic sage is a very interesting concept of somebody that's completely like above, almost kind of similar to the idea of like Buddhist enlightenment, except they don't like reach nirvana. They just kind of like become able to act and choose any decision they like want, like no matter the outside external circumstances. And so another influence I don't think I've mentioned the past 20 billion times we filmed this is the book about logotherapy by Viktor Frankl. And that definitely reminds me a lot of the Stoics, where he's able to, in the Holocaust, like try and like maintain his dignity pretty much. And he's able to like persevere through kind of like his mindset, not really because he was treated nicer than other prisoners or anything. And he talked about how people kind of will become nihilistic after a while. And he drew parallels to modern society where when people gave up in the Holocaust in some of the camps, they would like start smoking because the cigarettes were kind of like their currency. And so he kind of like draws parallels to like modern society. When people give up, they start like smoking or doing drugs and stuff. So that was really interesting. And he basically says that like what's meaningful is more important than safety. And that explains human behavior a lot better than I think like stuff like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like a lot of that stuff feels really Epicurean to me. And I think humans are more than just pleasure-seeking, pain-avoiding creatures, if that makes sense. And so that's all my influences. Aug, what about you?
I'd have to start at the same place that Doxxah did. Jack Donovan is not the most important, but definitely the most fundamental. Like the ideology of tribe matters. Tribe is the first like the first priority that you have to defend. It's one of your highest loyalties, aside to abstract concepts like the truth or God or something like that. And that is the context in which human beings thrive and seek to return to. That 100 to 150 person group that just was the situation human beings evolved out of and found themselves in for the majority of our history. That, I think, underpins my understanding of almost all other sociological, psychological, and like related to human beings events. Like everything is connected to that somehow. So everything ties back.
I mean, humans don't evolve that quickly, you know?
Yeah.
People are still designed to live in a tribal setting.
Exactly. Like a good example is like how ethno-nationalists, for example, they want to make a tribe out of their race. And their race can be anything from a few 100,000 people in the case of like the Japanese I knew, or millions of people if you want to generalize to American whites, quote unquote. I would make guess that is like a surrogate tribe. If you take like Theodore Kaczynski's idea of surrogate activities, which are activities that you use to get the same kind of feeling that you would get when hunting or foraging or defending your group from like wild animals or whatever, I'd say nations, clubs, any society that isn't a tribe or a family is like a surrogate tribe. And I think that also applies to the race, as most ethno-nationalists would put it. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's just that I think it's important we recognize what is surrogate and what is, true. And I personally prefer the smaller, truer tribe to the surrogate ethnicity or nation or whatever.
Well, yeah, I think the problem is like the nation state's such a modern concept. Like you can't really have. It used to just be like local towns, you know.
Yeah, a good way to put it is a bureaucracy-assisted tribe. which I think is a very apt term for what we have going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, like the nation state is simply one chain in the link of like larger and larger societies. People forget like the nation used to be like the most like the hated concept back in the day when kingdoms were being unified into single entities and like regional peoples were complaining about having their identities lost. Like Alsatians didn't want to be French, they were Alsatians, but eventually they were subsumed into a greater French identity. And now the same thing is happening to the French being subsumed into the European identity. So I think it's important to like recognize that nation, race, regional identity, and then our identity as human beings, you know, that the global homos like to use, are all just links in a chain of like larger and larger identities. And that if you really want to solve these problems, you'd have to get back to the first link in the chain, which is, you know, the 100-person tribe.
Yeah, that's true. I never really thought about it that way. With the definitely nation states, I think are honestly becoming outdated. Right?
Yeah,
It's like the global hegemony
yeah,
now.
exactly.
Like now to say like that you view your nation state above others like pins you as like this crazy nationalist. When
Yeah,
before like the nation state was kind of like something that like like the Wilsonian type people would support. You know
it's
what I
just
mean?
like and like saying that you were a Norman above being like a Frenchman back in say like 1850 would also pin you as someone that is absolutely insane.
Yeah,
Like
that's
these are
true.
just trends. It's just one like one data point like an ever increasing line. That's just yeah. And if you want true, I guess, identity, you would have to go back to the tribe.
Well,
That
what it,
outlines my feelings on identity and human origins and stuff like and like human relationships, I guess.
well, what do you think is the biggest you can go without losing that identity?
Probably something like a Greek city state where the culture is spread over a large area, but you maintain like ties of loyalty to people that you actually know and people that you can actually be held accountable to. I think also technology has a part to play in this because technology can artificially extend what feels like you know somebody. It's like the internet is like a force for centralization in culture because it makes people feel like they're communicating with someone even though they're really not.
That's true. But I'd say it's also fragmented our culture. Like think about how many sub communities within a
I mean,
culture exist.
I guess, but they're all tied into the common internet sphere, I guess you could say. Everybody's heard about everybody else. Furries are their own community, but everybody knows about furries. Like they're part of like the quote unquote internet community,
That's true.
which sounds cringe, but you know, the world is cringe.
The world is cringe.
We live in a society.
That's
But
that's pretty
yeah.
much the mindset and the
Yeah.
phrase.
Going forward, guys, just letting you
The
know.
world is cringe.
The world is cringe. 40 million cops dead. No, what was the one that one meme? It's like
Clown world.
no, like the piss earth one. Oh, I
Oh
forget what it
yeah.
was. Whatever, doesn't matter. On to the next influences. Uh,
Neil Postman.
the first author to get me woke on the technology question, the TQ, as some would put it, would be Neil Postman, who is kind of like a lesser known follower of Marshall McLuhan, who developed his ideas after McLuhan passed away. McLuhan's famous phrase, the medium is the message, which I find super important, which basically means that whatever you're trying to, the content of what you're trying to convey over a medium of communication is not as important as the effects that the medium has on the recipient. So like a television could be showing a super serious show or super serious set of news bits, but because of the way TV is designed, it has to make the news entertaining. And this has a profound psychological effect on human beings and on society. Short summary, quick and dirty, whatever. The way Neil Postman developed it, though, was that the medium is the metaphor. So he took the idea that there are prominent like myths in society, prominent metaphors that we use to relate to one another, and kind of like stick everything together. And that one of the primary things that defined these metaphors were the mediums of communication. So like the TV not only shapes our messages to one another, but it also shapes our cultural identities. Like people in society become more TV-like as time goes on. With the internet, people are becoming more internet-like, very sporadic, very short attention sighted. They expect things quickly. They multitask a lot. Just a couple of quick examples. But I find that very profound. Read his books. Amusing Ourselves to Death and Technopoly are very, very good.
Bowling Alone?
Oh, yeah, Bowling Alone. I like to do a lot of social research. Bowling Alone isn't like a super profound influence on my ideas, I guess. It's a really, really, really good book if you just want to crunch numbers and see what the data is like on like human beings' social interactions. So like you learn that Putnam's idea of like quantifying social relationships is like social capital. If you go through his methods and you end up quantifying a total amount of social capital, you'll end up finding that it's been on a precipitous decline since around 1960. And he traces this back to like multiple sets of causes in the book. It's been a while since I read it. I think it's something like generational turnover, technology, like TV and stuff like that, and loss of income, women entering the workforce. Basically, if you can sum it up in one word, it would be modernity. Modernity is causing a drop in social capital, which, if you've been paying attention, everybody obviously knows this, but it's very useful to have it, in numerical form, which is basically what the book does.
Interesting.
So that's important. Yeah, it's important. It's important. You guys should read it if you can. Theodore Kaczynski, Doxxah already mentioned it. Super important, surrogate activities, industrial society. The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster
for mankind.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, obviously that. And I guess metaphysically speaking and spiritually and theologically speaking, I'm a Catholic. So that, like, the church fathers and the writings of Thomas Aquinas have had like a really big impact on me personally. I haven't read the Bible. I know. Big shame.
That's funny because I have.
I'm getting on that. I'm getting onto it. But yeah, the idea of a single connecting, ordering force in nature and in reality, which we call God. Some other people use Gnon, or whatever.
Some people just say like higher power, but it's like it pretty much means the same thing.
Basically, God or nature's God, whatever, that exists and that provides order and purpose to reality itself. And you have to align yourself with that to be truly spiritually fulfilled and correct, which, another very important idea of mine, which is why I always kind of seek the truth, I guess. I'm a truth seeker guy.
It kind of runs into the skeptic libertarian we were talking about in one of the other 20 takes.
A couple takes ago, I went on a rant. Well, not a rant, but kind of like an explanation about where Doxxah and I are coming from. So a lot of people that will probably be listening to these podcasts are on the right. And on the far right, probably. And the way that most people get onto the far right is usually through like the skeptosphere, to libertarianism, to ethno-nationalism, and then they like branch off into a bunch of different philosophies. That could be Evola, that could be Elul, That can be John Michael Greer. It can be anybody.
It's true.
Doxxah and I took an alternate path. And that's why Jack Donovan's works are so important to us. Because we went through skepticism, of course. Sargon of Akkad, kind of cringe.
Thunderfoot.
Kraut. Oh, God. Kind of embarrassing, but everybody has those stories. But instead of progressing onto libertarianism, at least myself, I on a chance, like totally by chance, got to Jack Donovan, and he was the one that kind of brought me into this new world. So I never went through the whole the ethnos is like the most important thing, or sets of ideological principles are the most important thing that define my identity. I didn't, or like not even learning about identity in the libertarian phase.
Yeah, like libertarians definitely think that identity is unimportant and
Exactly.
an obstacle to be overcome.
We never went through those phases. We kind of just cut directly to tribe pill. Decelerate the world, decelerate your tribe, accelerate the world type stuff. So we're coming at it from a very different perspective than most people have gone through.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really bring the racial aspect to our analyses because, we never had the racial aspect in our lives.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
And
I just think that makes us... Yeah?
What were you saying? I just had to stop you there for a second. Even just talk a little bit more about the racial aspect. I don't know about you, Aug, but I've never really gotten behind it. Just because I think I've lived in a bunch of different places, and you realize that being a certain ethnicity doesn't matter to people of that ethnicity in most situations.
Flipping blacks are ruining our neighborhoods, stuff like that, because we never identify with the wider culture or wider identity than just our friends and family.
Yeah,
basically
makes sense.
Unless you count a kind of nascent American nationalism that kind of died out as soon as we started digging even a little bit deeper into philosophy, anthropology, psychology, and whatever.
Mm-hmm. Definitely the only kind of American nationalism, if you want to call it that, is keeping the country stable enough to keep me and my friends and family safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean?
More just self-preservation.
So we have never had identification with a larger movement than friends and family, which makes our perspective more unique than a lot of what other people bring to the table. It's not necessarily to say that what they're bringing to the table is bad. It's just that
it's just a different perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
I think especially with the internet, a lot of people are trying to create kind of these mass movements of people that don't know each other in real life and try to kind of network them together to make some kind of political or social change. And I'd say we're definitely the opposite of that. We're much bigger on what I think we would recommend our viewers do is to connect with people in their real life if they want to make some kind of political or social change, and to try and do that on a more local scale.
Just make a local community and stick to that. Protect and try and make your local community thrive, essentially, is all you really need to do.
And by local community, I don't think we mean...
focusing on the large-scale issues is, sure, it might be important later on, but if you don't have a local community, you're not really doing it for anybody or anything.
True.
I think that doing it for some nebulous white identity or American identity or whatever, it's kind of a fool's move, because sure, you share one level of identity with these people, but it's not the fundamental one which matters the most to your health and happiness and to society in general's health and happiness, which is the core unit of human beings, the tribe.
True. And I think when we say community, we don't mean white suburbs or some kind of city in the middle of Oklahoma or something. I think we mean, when we're saying we mean community, we mean, if possible, creating some kind of self-sustaining group of people that all know each other personally in real life, and that all would be willing to pretty much die for each other. A group that's close enough to be considered family, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up, actually.
Yeah, that's a good place to end it.
So, guys, we hope that you guys will check in for our podcast coming in the future. We're going to be doing kind of like a read along. We'll be selecting a couple of books, going through the Western canon, and reviewing and doing episodes on them as we go. The book list will be posted if you guys want to like read along with us. We'll be trying to get these episodes out, like monthly? Would you
Maybe
say?
bi-monthly at the most.
Yes, because these books take time, like
A very long time. Lots of reading. So this has been Doxxah and Aug, and we hope to see you guys around on the channel and on the podcast in the future.